Good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Welcome to the first webinar that we're hosting in 2025 as part of the efforts of the Hydrogen for Development Partnership. As context, the Hydrogen for Development Partnership is a World Bank initiative dedicated to share knowledge, build capacities, and facilitate investments for clean hydrogen deployment in developing countries. And this week, it is also a great pleasure for us as we have achieved a milestone. We are welcoming the 50th partner to the initiative, the Regional Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency that are based in Egypt. And this demonstrates that the partnership has convened relevant stakeholders from all over the world, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and North Africa, Asia, and we also have the pleasure of having the OECD as part of the H4D partnership. They are members since over 1 year. And in the session today, we will be presenting the key insights from the newly published report, leveraging the risking instruments and international coordination to catalyze investment in clean hydrogen. This is a joint publication by the OECD and the World Bank. And today we have here the authors that have prepared this very insightful report. Also, the report that we'll be discussing today builds on the conclusions from another joint publication that was launched in 2023, Scaling Hydrogen Financing for Development. So it is my, again, pleasure to have here Mrs. Moon Young Lee. She's a policy analyst at the Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization Program of the OECD, where she focuses on clean energy financing and sustainable development. We will also have Mr. Deger Saigin. He works at the Environmental Directorate of the OECD, and he leads the Industry Decarbonization Program. Mr. Saigin was also an expert at IRENA and other international institutions prior to joining the OECD. And our third speaker, Mr. Joseph Cordonnier, he works at the OECD in the Environment Directorate, and in his current role, he supports the development of policy measures and financial instruments to scale up investments in industry decarbonization and clean hydrogen in emerging economies. So without any further ado, I give the word to Deger Saigin, who will give some introductory remarks. And after that, we will have the presentation from Moon and Joseph. And later on, we will have a session of conversation, some questions, and we will finalize with some Q&A. So, Deger, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carolina. And indeed, I'm here together with the co-authors of the report from the OECD side, Joseph, Moon, Joanna sitting next to me, as well as Carolina yourself, together with Dolph. And it has been an extremely 2 productive years as the OECD and the World Bank focusing on the financing aspects of the clean hydrogen development. And Ignacio, if I may ask, you may want to already share the slides so we can start going through, especially slide 2, which actually summarizes a little bit the background to this report and the collaboration between the OECD and the World Bank in this space. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll just present it and I will hand over to the authors, Moon and Joseph from the OECD side. I don't think I need to speak for the H4D. Carolina already gave you the latest updates. But as the OECD, we are quite active on the investment financing business models and procurement related work stream. That is the third work stream, where we are co-chairing and working very closely with the World Bank there. And that has led to 2, let's say, connected publications over the past 2 years. As you know, the Scaling Hydrogen Financing for Development has outlined the various financing solutions that is required for clean hydrogen project development in emerging markets and developing economies. And it also outlined a problem, and that was the risks associated with the clean hydrogen projects, and to which extent they impact. And most importantly, it also highlighted that the cost of capital, or as we typically hear, the financing cost, is actually a big issue when it comes to the clean hydrogen projects. And since this report was published, and I'm very happy, although this is obviously an issue, but it has attracted a lot of attention from the policymakers, but also from the financing community. And cost of finance now is being discussed quite heavily. And I think through this report, we made an important contribution to that discussion. Now, at the end of last year, precisely on the 17th of December, again, the World Bank and the OECD released another joint report. And there we've looked at the solutions on how to de-risk and how to reduce the cost of finance for clean hydrogen projects. My colleagues Moon and Joseph will give you detailed insights from that report in a minute. But the report is obviously an important contribution to the 10 gigawatt initiative of the World Bank. Obviously, OECD is not a bank, so we don't provide financing, but we provide the knowledge, policy solutions in operationalizing this important initiative. And also, together with the World Bank, we are also contributing to the finance track of the breakthrough agenda, where especially on the finance and investment, we are partnering and carrying out some of the learnings from there to other initiatives, which is coordinated by the breakthrough. Now, the results of this work will be presented in a second, but let me again thank the World Bank team for the very, very pleasant and productive collaboration. And we are very happy to be a partner of the H4D and look forward to this year for the ongoing work and next steps. And hopefully we will inform you on that in the coming months as things develop. Thank you. And over to you, Moon and Joseph. Thank you, Carolina, again.
Thank you very much there. So we can go to the next slide very briefly, just to confirm, as mentioned by Carolina and by there, that one of the purposes of this report is to inform the 10 gigawatt lighthouse initiative that aims to provide finance to large-scale clean hydrogen projects in emerging and developing economies, and doing that by identifying available pipeline of large-scale clean hydrogen projects, identifying and proposing solutions, which is the key focus of this report, and then move towards implementation on working on this specific pipeline of projects. So moving to the next slides, where I will briefly highlight the key messages of this report, and how they can contribute not only to the 10 gigawatt lighthouse initiative, but also to other key international fora, such as the breakthrough agenda, and in particular, its priority action on finance and investment. So the first key message from this report is that effective de-risking strategies require a combination of instruments. And here, first, we have carried out an investor survey in order to identify what could be the most relevant instruments to attract investment, focusing really on the de-risking part, so what could come prior to financing itself. And out of our selection, a few instruments stood out, such as contract for difference or offtake guarantees that are critical to address the offtake risk, and that Moon will describe more in detail. The second key findings on the combination of instruments is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. First, because the business models vary with projects, so project design can vary, national conditions vary, end use vary as well, and therefore the first need is to tailor a package of instruments to balance the project risk-return profile. And the second element is that the risking instruments often come at a cost. So even though they can help improve overall the levelized cost of hydrogen, reduce cost of capital, most of these instruments require to pay a fee or are not for, or require some spending. And therefore, the purpose is also to combine them in order to address the key risks while avoiding overlaps. The next key message is that while it is important to have de-risking instruments at hand, and many of them are existing and can be tailored, it's a key prerequisite to have enabling conditions to create a conducive environment. So without, for instance, access to infrastructure or without a strong demand for a given project, the de-risking instruments will not necessarily make an unprofitable project really attractive for investors. It rather helps and nudges investors to invest in projects that already have plenty of positive signs. And the last element is that we also focused on the implementation part to inform the 10 gigawatt initiative. And therefore, we also identified a few key actions that could be carried out through international collaboration in order to scale clean hydrogen projects. So I'll stop there for now and hand over to Moon to provide detailed insights on the report.
Thank you, Joseph. So from this point, I will walk you through a bit of details of the report. So starting from the clean hydrogen project lifecycle, when we're discussing about making the project more viable and also de-risk certain risks that present throughout the lifecycle, it is crucial to understand what kind of risks are present at the different stage of project life cycles. So risk in clean hydrogen projects evolve throughout the project life cycle. As you can see from this chart, different risk mitigation is obviously required at each stage, especially for the early phase before the financial close, which marked as FID here in this chart. Including the pre-feasibility and feasibility, as well as front-end engineering design. Here, the project faces high uncertainty related to technology readiness, cost, as well as regulatory framework and market condition. Particularly here, you see the light blue curve coming down from very high up to going slowly down when they are reaching to the financial close, indicating that risk level is much higher at the early stage of the projects compared to the time that meeting the financial close. But of course, that doesn't mean that the risk is completely not present after the financial close, after FID stage. For instance, I think it is important to note that 95% of total project costs are incurred during the construction, commissioning, and operational phases, meaning that underscoring the need of continued risk mitigation is required even after the FID. Now, I want to highlight a bit of importance on the pre-FID, given a lot of projects that is globally announced in the clean hydrogen in the last couple of years. We see a lot of projects committed, but at the same time have facing the bottleneck right before the FID. Mainly, it's also there is still lack of the technical understanding as well as understanding about how to address the complexity of the projects of clean hydrogen, which gives challenges around how to address the proper project appraisal as well as conducting the feasibility study that is quite crucial, linking to the bankability as well as attracting the investors. But this, my colleague Joseph will elaborate further when we're discussing a little bit about the case study that we presented in this report. Now, moving on to next slide. So different risks present in the different stage of the clean hydrogen project life cycle. But the main issues, particularly around clean hydrogen, as Dare mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, is that the high cost of capital, particularly with the clean hydrogen. The reason behind that is first, the hydrogen projects like renewable energy projects, due to the front-loaded capital structure and substantial upfront investment, are quite susceptible to changes in the cost of capital. As you can see in this I'm sorry, but I don't see the slide in from my end. Maybe the projection is stopped for now.
We are solving it, Moon. It will be back in 30 seconds. Sorry for that.
No worries at all. Okay, so in this slide, you see that how the impact of cost of financing having on levelized cost of hydrogen. If you increase the 6% of cost of capital, then it has impact on 50% increase of levelized cost of hydrogen, which is quite substantial. And this also hampering, particularly for developing countries, to enjoy their abundant renewable potential and producing the cost competitive electricity, renewable electricity, which is crucial for creating or generating the cost competitive hydrogen. If the cost of financing is having substantial impacts on driving up the levelized cost of hydrogen. So it is important for us to understand what drives the cost of financing for hydrogen projects, particularly in the context of developing and emerging countries. And briefly, if you look this chart, it shows two aspects that contributing the difference of cost of financing between two economic blocks in the developed versus developing. Mainly consist of two factors on the, of course, project-related specific risk, such as around less experienced contractors, lack of enabling infrastructure, as well as limited hydrogen industry expertise, which is more linked to the nascent nature of the hydrogen industry. But other components that driving up the cost of financing and more relevant to the emerging and developing countries is country-specific risk. So here you see the political instability, legal uncertainty, as well as currency risk, which is more significantly higher and posing the challenges for the emerging and developing countries in terms of addressing the cost of financing. Now, next slide, please. Now, having understanding the cost of financing is one of the key issues that when we're talking about deploying or accelerating hydrogen for the decarbonization as well as climate neutral future. We have to understand how then we can find a solution to tackle this. To begin with, we started to understand what are the key risks that are driving up the cost of financing in the context of clean hydrogen, and how we should tailor this solution targeting to the priority risk. So for this, in 2023, together with World Bank colleagues, we have done the investor survey. And as you can see, the priority risk, which is blue bar, shows that it's linked to the offtake risk. So this is more linked to, as we discussed, and many audience here will be familiar with, is that it's linked to the absence of merchant risk for hydrogen, leading to limited price transparency and the market fragmentation. And also this is major challenge in a sense that it hinders the stable cash flow forecast, which is also the issue around the project viability and bankability. Now, of course, there is discussion around that hydrogen derivatives such as ammonia have established the pricing, but considering that there's no specific index to distinguish renewable or clean derivatives from fossil fuel-based alternatives, it still remains a challenge to have a clarity around the pricing. They also, you see in the blue charts, that another challenges linked to offtake is limited credible offtakers, meaning it's crucial linked to the cash flow forecasting, having a long-term contract. But at the moment in the market, we see a lot of off-takers are facing the vintage project dilemma, where early adopters risk paying higher price while future projects benefit from cost reduction along the learning curve. Thereby, there's still hesitation around committing to the long-term contract, as well as combining with the uncertainty around the hydrogen market itself. So to mitigate offtake risk, which my colleague Joseph will elaborate a bit further through the case study that we have done for this report, but we see also many developers, mainly industry players as well as energy companies, are adopting a business model that produce hydrogen derivatives like low carbon ammonia, steel, or cement to address these offtake issues. As well as we see the discussion around market-based alternatives, such as contract for differences, but still all these solutions are still require significant public support or subsidies, as well as concessional financing, thereby still hard to sustain as it is. Next slide, please. Now, having the risk factors prioritized, and which is to have understanding the specific challenges around the clean hydrogen financing. We wanted to understand what kind of solution could be potentially deployed. But the challenge around to identifying solution is that, as discussed quite multiple times now, clean hydrogen sector is still at very early stage. So thereby, there's lack of convergence in key project characteristics, such as project sizes, ticket sizes, and project sponsors and lenders. So it also hinders us to understand the risk profile of the project itself. So to address these challenges, what we have done is doing some comparison with similar assets in different sectors, such as LNG, thermal, offshore wind, and to identify how these sectors has deployed the risk instruments throughout their project deployment or the structuring itself. So here, just to touch up and briefly on different comparison, of course, I want to emphasize here for this chart, it's the risk present for each asset is average, meaning that depends on the project size and characteristic, as well as size and where the project is taking place, degree of the risk could be different. But here what we have done is more of average cases to have some comparison to understand the profiles of the clean hydrogen project itself. So starting from the LNG, they as well as offshore wind, to some extent, they share some key characteristics such as large-scale projects, and they require high capital intensity, of course, long investment horizon, and more interestingly, that there's a technological complexity of all these three assets. But the difference is that for clean hydrogen projects, it touches upon multiple components. For instance, water desalination, renewable power generation, electrolyzer, storage, transportation. So the complexity of the clean hydrogen is more evident compared to LNG or other sectors, particularly if the clean hydrogen projects configuration is co-located model or it's whether dispersed model. It could also differ the risk profile of the project itself. By comparison, offshore wind and LNG is more standardized as it deployed quite years of the time. So there is less of confusion around how we should interpret the risk profile. Also, the other factor is on the pricing, because we often hear the early LNG market is quite similar to clean hydrogen, but the main difference that we would like to highlight is that for LNG, as discussed, it's quite well established compared to clean hydrogen. So thereby, there is a tradable market with price transparency, whereas hydrogen is still in the process of formation of the pricing itself. And for the thermal power plants, there is a similarity in terms of project scale and capital intensity, but and some extent supply chain risk if the clean hydrogen is produced through natural gas and then using the CCUS, for example, to make it cleaner. However, there's a significant difference in terms of environmental impact as well as health and safety, because for the clean hydrogen, particularly, it has different wide flammability range, thereby it has more significant impacts environmentally, but also a health component. So there's different risk factors also to be compared while there's a similarity. Last point, probably on the offshore wind, both clean hydrogen and offshore wind requires long lead time. As discussed earlier, there's a critical importance on how to deal with risk factors at the early stage, where design and construction complete risk are high. Both clean hydrogen offshore is now, because of this complexity, led by energy companies or large industrial players who are more experienced in dealing with the technical complexity and know how to deal with the risk. But while there is this kind of similarity, and also both assets are facing, in some extent, merchant risk, there's a different aspect where the merchant risk or degree of the merchant risk. For example, offshore wind is more directly tied to the volatility of the power markets and faces curtailment risk, where hydrogen market is more linked to the nascent market context that we discussed throughout this presentation. Next slide, please. So having that comparison gave us identification around 60 de-risk instruments that has been deployed in different assets in different sectors. And then what we have done is use 3 criteria to prioritize de-risk instruments potentially deployable but also replicable in the clean hydrogen project context. So the 3 criteria was mainly about the potential of attracting private capital, and we have looking into deployment history, as well as if there is a more granular information, we're looking into how the instruments contribute to mitigating financing risk as well. So here on the slide, you see on the left side of column, you see 13 de-risk instruments that we have prioritized based on this exercise. And then you see the very top row present risk factors identified by investors, which you saw in the earlier slide. And it has been ranked in order of priority from left to right. And darker shades of the green indicates stronger confidence among respondents regarding the effectiveness of each instrument. For example, contract for differences and offtake guarantee are considered highly effective in addressing market uncertainty risk related to demand and price fluctuation in the hydrogen sector. But when it comes to the country risk, you see that which is more a crucial risk factor that has to be addressed by emerging in the emerging and developing countries. There is a preferences or confidence shown in the political risk insurance or foreign investment insurance, which often provided by institutions such as MIGA or also export credit agencies. So these are the solutions that has been identified by investors as to address the country-specific risk. And Additionally, loan syndication received a strong confidence from the investor as a tool to manage interest rate or exchange rate risk. This is basically likely small ticket sizes and co-investing alongside with other investor or lenders help distribute risk across the larger pool of investor. Ultimately, it helps to also invest enhancing the financing solution. So we have seen this syndicated loan solution in a wide range of case study that we have been looking into for the clean hydrogen products. So it also aligned with what we are observing in the market as well. Next slide, please. We have also done a bit more granular analysis, depends on the country context. As we discussed earlier in the slide, there is a different risk present, depends on where the project is taking place. And particularly the risk is pretty much influenced a lot by the country context, which is linked to the country risk or macroeconomic condition of the country. So we have done 4 scenarios in the report, but here in the slide, we're presenting 2 specific cases with the A credit rating and also the other one on the triple B credit rating. The reason is that to show the different de-risk preferences in different country contexts. So on the left side, with the red bars, shows more developed country context with the A credit rating. And here, of course, in both cases, of course, it shows the offtake risk remains as a major concern. But more coming into country context for the left side, which is more developed country context, investor prioritize performance guarantees largely linked to the fact that there's a limited operational experience with the hydrogen technologies, for instance, such as electrolyzer. On the right side is shown with the blue bar, it's more on the emerging and developing country context. Here we see that a lot of focus after the offtake risk goes into addressing the macroeconomic risks, including currency volatility and financial stability concern. Now I hand it over to my colleague, Joseph. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Moon. So in the following section of the report, we have provided a mapping of international initiatives that are active in the field of clean hydrogen financing. Some being more knowledge partners, such as the OECD or the International Energy Agency, but also development finance institutions, multilateral development banks, and other actors that actually finance projects. In our investor survey, we have also suggested a number of actions that international collaboration for clean hydrogen could undertake to accelerate the market uptake, with two main ideas. The first one is to be pragmatic. So there is a need to invest quickly in the lighthouse project or in the first movers in order to start learning by doing and to have success stories, and therefore trying to find some quick pragmatic actions that could be undertaken. And the second one is to avoid duplication of efforts, given that, as you can see in the charts, there are very large numbers of initiatives that have been launched, and that can also create lots of additionality and multiple processes. So the outcome of this work is to first identify that the main expectations from project developers and investors is to see how to get joint financing of international finance institutions for clean hydrogen projects. So to see how efforts can be made for a single large-scale projects by bringing together several actors around the table. In order to achieve this, there were a number of suggestions that were made. The first one being to build on country platforms or to create a dedicated international platform in order to identify clean hydrogen projects pipeline in emerging and developing economies. And in addition to this platform creation that could facilitate the sourcing of projects, to harmonize appraisal and procurement processes. This action can take a bit more time, but the purpose here was also for project developers to have a streamlined process when approaching multiple financiers. And the last action that was highlighted is to continue fostering knowledge exchange and capacity building on clean hydrogen financing in emerging markets and developing economies, which can take the form of webinars as we have today, capacity building programs as it starts also to be provided by a number of initiatives, also with the objective to bring alongside international investors, local investors in the financing of hydrogen projects. So a number of actions that we also hope to see materialize through the 10 gigawatt initiative and through H40. Moving to the next slides on the case studies. So all the work that we have presented relies on literature review, desk-based research, investor survey. But in addition to all this, we have also been developing over the last 3 years a number of case studies of, on the first hand, clean hydrogen projects, focusing mostly on emerging and developing economies, but also taking a few examples on developed economies where we feel that the lessons learned could be valuable for all countries. And this case study on project sides also focus mostly to large-scale projects, so that are also related to the scope of the 10 gigawatts initiative. In addition to these case studies at project level, we also have developed this year a number of case studies on economic de-risking and financing instruments in order to analyze what was available on the market or what was already provided in order to support clean hydrogen. And here we have covered various geographies, various type of providers as well, from governments, MDBs, also private insurance companies, for instance, so and private funds. So a large array of solutions that are on the market, and all these case studies are structured in the same way to first understand the concept of the instruments, then understanding as well which projects it can support or has supported, and then trying to analyze for those instruments that have already supported some projects, what are the lessons learned and how they could be replicated or scaled up. Moving to the next slide on the key lessons from the case studies. So we have much more details, of course, in the reports, and here we are just focusing on a few key lessons. The first one, as mentioned in the introduction, is that most projects that we have seen reaching FID or getting close to FID are also building on good enabling conditions. Sometimes this is selecting very carefully the locations of the projects, checking as well access to infrastructure, checking as well the alignment of national or regional strategies and policies. So here policymakers also have a huge role to play. And an example of this is, for instance, India's national hydrogen mission, where a strategy document was issued and then several auctions were run as part of this strategy, so ensuring as well a consistent and coherent country strategy. In addition to this, as part of the enabling conditions, as mentioned by Moon, even though the spend at feasibility stage remains quite low for clean hydrogen projects compared to the spend during construction and operations, it is extremely critical to lower the risks at this stage, given that improving the project risk return profile before FID can help improve the cost of capital and therefore greatly improve the business case for the projects. And we have seen a number of initiatives that provide technical assistance during the feasibility stage or grants and subsidies at this stage or reimbursable amounts. And this is, for instance, the case for the Eco-Invest program in Brazil. So we can see here that this is an extremely helpful instrument in order to de-risk the large-scale clean hydrogen projects. Then on the risk-sharing side, so when it comes at a stage where the risk mitigation strategies are being defined, one of the first learning is that economic instruments developed by government can play a key role. So we have seen various instruments being deployed, for instance, through various governments using H2 global mechanisms. So a double auction process that helps as well to subsidize specific projects. And with the first one being selected in Egypt for ammonia production. We have also seen other countries investigating the use of OPEX subsidies, as is the case in Japan for the low carbon hydrogen and ammonia program. and other countries also had tax rebates or tax incentives as foreseen, for instance, in the national incentives set up in Egypt. And a second element of risk sharing is also to have a partnership across the value chain and partnerships between various types of actors. So along the value chain, we have seen, for instance, in the case of Stegra or H2 Green Steel, very strong offtake agreements or even some equity taken by potential off-takers in the projects. So enabling to create a very strong link between the producer of clean hydrogen or the derivative and the markets. We have also seen in many projects the integration of renewable electricity production for the production of clean hydrogen as part of the scope of the projects. And we have seen that this helps as well alleviate some risks and sometimes optimize the cost of capital or identify additional sources of revenues, for instance, if excess electricity can be sold on the market. And it's important as well, not only to have private partnership across value chain, but also the involvement of public actors. One of the main elements where we have seen huge expectations for the public sector to intervene was for the access to infrastructure and for the creation of socioeconomic benefits or co-benefits of the projects. Given that for many project developers, the creation, for instance, of port infrastructure in order to export hydrogen and derivative, or the logistic facilities to make sure that the location is suitable, were out of their envelope, and they were also expecting the public sector to play a key role to provide this kind of enabling condition or taking this part of the risk. Then moving to the last part on financing itself. So once enabling conditions are in place, once several actors have agreed to collaborate in order to share risk, the question is also how to finance these projects that are extremely capital intensive with quite large ticket size. And here, one of the main solutions or approaches that was mentioned by project developers in the case studies were to use blended finance. And blended finance, as defined by OECD, also has a component on development. And therefore, that means that the purpose here is not only to benefit from better market conditions, possibly from grants and subsidies that can help leverage private capital and directly improve the business model or the profitability of the projects, but also to see if the projects could have additional benefits that contribute to the development of the emerging economies, which can be by, for instance, through job creation or through improved access to infrastructure, improved access to water in case the projects use desalination plant, etc. And we have seen an example here, for instance, in the project developed by Hyphen in Namibia, where a specific agreement has been prepared with the government in order to outline development rules or development objectives for the projects to achieve. So I stop here for the presentation. Again, we hope that the report contributes to informing financial institutions and other stakeholders to boost the development of clean hydrogen projects in emerging economies. We're also happy to answer a few questions and to see what additional analysis or what additional actions could be undertaken to further support this effort. Carolina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Joseph, Moon, and Degar, for your presentation. So we will now proceed to a quick discussion with the panel members, and the last 20 minutes of the session, we will open it to questions and answers from the audience. So I wanted to mention that it's very interesting to listening what are these findings that you have mapped, and especially what are the risks mitigation instruments that are relevant not only for developing countries, but also that have been deployed in high-income OECD countries. And what I would like to ask you is, considering the inherent risks that are proper to these clean hydrogen projects, are there de-risking tools detailed in the report that you would prioritize, especially after listening that you mapped over 60 de-risking instruments? So we would be very keen to learn more about it. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can start, and I'm sure Moon will complement if I forget anything. I think one of the first item here that we have identified also in last year's survey is that the major risk that was highlighted by investors was the offtake risk. And the survey this year confirmed that number of instruments that can address the offtake risk should be prioritized in the development of projects. So this includes contract for difference, which is a bit at the boundary between de-risking and financing, as well as offtake guarantees. So these two instruments, and across all countries' credit ratings, were often prioritized. Then if we look more specifically at emerging and developing economies, political risk insurance and foreign currency guarantees were also highlighted as key. In the case of foreign currency guarantee, this is also due to the cost and revenue structure of each project. So especially for those projects which keep, I would say, a lot of costs in domestic currency, but that expect to have a large share of their production sold on international markets in hard currency. We see that this risk is quite difficult to cover, especially for projects with long asset lifetime and long-term loans. So here we have seen that many investors were also calling for it. And the very last one that we have seen emerging actually recently is on technology performance guarantees. And there, the main risk is that there is a very limited track record for large-scale clean hydrogen projects. So these instruments exist for many technologies. Several insurance companies or insurance brokers are proposing instruments, and we have case studies on Munich Re and Marsh insurance products in the report. But of course, the question is how this technology performance guarantee, or sometimes constructions and operations guarantee, can be packaged and provided for these specific projects with limited track record.
Thank you, Joseph. I do not know if Moon or Degar would like to add on something, or we can go to the next question. Okay. So I must say that from the World Bank Group, it is very interesting to see that many of the case studies that you included in this report are also the countries where we have been implementing lending operations. For example, in India, where we have a 3 billion loan that is to support policies and regulations to ramp up hydrogen and the overall energy transition. The 150 million lending that is now operational in Chile, and that has mobilized $1 billion to support hydrogen and production. So I wanted to ask also, from the OECD, have you seen successful examples of emerging economies attracting international finance for clean hydrogen initiatives? What specific policies or strategies did they implement to build that investor confidence and secure the financing? And what lessons can other emerging markets and developing countries learn from that experience?
Let me start with the specific case that OECD also contributing in terms of advancing the hydrogen agenda or deployment of the projects in the emerging and developing countries. Specifically, at the OECD currently, through the Clean Energy Finance Investment Mobilization Team, we work with many emerging and developing countries that includes Egypt, who has a high ambition on positioning the country as a powerhouse of clean hydrogen production. And now here, the country has recently announced also green hydrogen incentive law, where it gives a land acquisition incentive, as well as some of the common infrastructure issue that we raised today. Through the report, they give incentive toward the access to this infrastructure, as well as, of course, tax credit is involved around for those who are developing the clean hydrogen. So this kind of regulatory and policy enabling conditions are crucial, especially if you look at the analytical components that we have done for identifying the risk instruments. Is that a lot of countries who have endowment for the renewables, they are facing country risk, specifically driving up the cost of financing. So these are the measures helping the countries to address macroeconomic conditions that the country is inherited, and give more investor confidence for those who are interested to have projects in these countries. And plus, in terms of the risk allocation, it's one way to also having a more balanced PPP structure, meaning that having a enabling and clear policy a direction from the emerging and developing countries also help to identify PPP cooperation potential for this large infrastructure projects. Because main challenges that we're facing for clean hydrogen projects is to find the right sweet spots on risk allocation that we have seen through this presentation today. And then the best in principle, PPP is a right mechanism where disperse the risk in more handful or the technically savvy stakeholders in the project composition. So having a enabling regulatory environment as well as policy incentives is definitely one way to address the immediate challenges for emerging and developing countries relevant to the country-specific risk. But also it's one way to also create certain momentum on the PPP projects. So.
Thank you very much, Moon, for the response. And also, you have explained to us what are the risks that affect hydrogen, but also what are the similarities that they could have and the relation with other industries. So considering the risking strategies that you have mapped, how could this be adapted or applied to the unique challenges of clean hydrogen projects? Also considering that the report of the OECD and the World Bank, I would say that we wanted to see hydrogen not only production, but also the potential uses, because this is not just something that is in a vacuum, but that's all of you have said it. It's a new industry that potentially can also help decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors and industries that cannot be electrified.
Yes, indeed. So taking also the example of a few case studies that we have seen, there is a very huge uncertainty on the offtake of hydrogen itself as a molecule directly, except for a few applications, which are mainly the applications where gray hydrogen is currently consumed, like refineries, possibly ammonia production as well, and where the industrial process doesn't need to be modified. In other case studies, we have really seen many project developers trying to basically rely on existing markets. So, for instance, trying to sell steel instead of hydrogen, because there is a market for steel, and the question there becomes not really is there an outlet for my products, but rather can I get a green premium? Can I get an additional incentive because there is for instance, for sustainable aviation fuels, is there a mandate for consumers to consume? For green steel, is there an incentive for some consumers, such as automotive manufacturers, to pay additional price to have green steel and reduce their Scope 3 emissions? So yeah, many project developers were really trying to look a bit the downstream part of the value chain in order to see where it makes more sense to sell the hydrogen derivatives, actually.
Thank you very much. And one final question before we open it to the audience. How can we foster effective collaboration among financial institutions, in addition to what we do at H4D? But specifically, like, what have you seen some best practices for balancing a very sometimes crowded arena and some competing priorities? I do not know who would like to address that from the OECD colleagues.
No, I think that's a very challenging question. I think we see a lot of very good initiative also at country level. Maybe not at a stage where we see joint financing being very common or project appraisal to be shared. But we see a lot of knowledge exchange. An example is, for instance, in South Africa, where there are regular meetings of development finance institutions to exchange on the recent progress of various projects, of initiatives, of the industry development in the country, etc. So collaboration exists. What we have seen here through the survey is more the question on how to make it more concrete for action to provide a bit direct technical assistance to projects, direct support of feasibility study, and also to I don't know if that's really having an open model, but at least to have a common project appraisal and a single project appraisal that then can bring together several financing institutions to evaluate the projects jointly.
Thank you very much, Joseph. And before I go to the questions from the chat, I think I also take this opportunity to give some additional words on the 10 gigawatt lighthouse initiative. So it was launched by at COP, past COP in Azerbaijan, and currently it has 14 development finance institutions from African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, but also national development institutions, CDP from Italy, KfW, and some export credit agencies like JBIC. And the objective of this is that we all join efforts and forces so that we can really ramp up the first hydrogen projects in 10 priority countries. So we look forward to enable 10 gigawatt of electrolysis capacity by 2030 in 10 countries, which are Namibia, Mauritania, South Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Colombia, Brazil, India, and I cannot recall the other two, but I can put some further information in the chat. So maybe we can go with the first question that is in the chat. And for those colleagues that are still connected and would like to pose your question, you can also raise your hand. So from Roxana Serpa, I think you have addressed this question, Joseph. In slide 8, when comparing risks and projects, at what stage were they compared? Because risk profile changes when industries developed. And also from Roxana, on international coordination for international financing, what would be the right tool platform for the institutions to get together and expedite collaboration? Is there any preferred mechanism? So maybe we can start with those two and we can go with the others.
I think in the chat we briefly, I think my colleague Joseph answered to first question from Roxana on the comparison chart, but just a bit elaborate further. We mainly looking into the investment appraisal process. So looking into the market in the context of market current condition, we have compared the assets in a manner when we are appraising the bankability or project viability of assets given the risk appetites that makes the project viable. So it's more aligned with the steps or the process of the investment project appraisal process.
Okay, and next question from Sixto Palacios. This finance can support projects that are public-private partnerships, or are there any restrictions? From Jan Genkle, how do you define well-structured economic instruments for risk sharing? Slide 13. And yeah, I think it's the report advocates for better coordination among participating international institutions to reduce transaction costs and speed up approvals. What specific steps can be taken to achieve this coordination, and what challenges might need to be addressed in the process?
Yeah, maybe on Jan's question on the well-structured economic instruments, as indeed the slide is a bit, the wording of the slide is a bit generic. So we don't have, to say, very specific list of criteria for this, but a few key elements are first the ease of access and the ease of implementation of these instruments. So the rules, the eligibility of projects, the evaluation phase or selection phase of the beneficiaries, all this should be extremely clear and streamlined and as targeted as possible. A second element to talk about well-structured economic instruments is also their potential to leverage private finance. At the end, this is a use of public funds here, and the purpose is not to crowd out private investors, but rather to help projects that are a bit at the edge of profitability to attract additional financing from the private sector. So these are, for instance, two key elements here that we are scrutinizing in the case studies.
Thank you very much, Joseph. I don't see any further questions. Colleagues, if you would like to ask something else to our panelists, please raise your hand. Oh, here there's another question. So Christian Gischler from IDB, please go ahead.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Joseph, Ongyong. I was wondering, under the current conditions that we live in, do you see a more, let's say, better scenario for hydrogen produced by natural gas versus electrolytic hydrogen? And yeah, basically that. How do you see it? What are we looking for? The risking conditions that we are looking at, and the current conditions of the world. Thank you.
Maybe we can respond that, and later on we can respond the another that has that we have in the chat.
Okay, I can start on the Christian's question first, and I'm pretty sure Joseph also has a complementary answer for this question. I think there is in my view, perception toward that for instance, blue hydrogen could be more economically viable or fast in terms of deployment. But I think it really depends. If you look at the nitty-gritty of, for instance, creating let's say retrofitting, for example, retrofitting the pipeline for the use of let's say hydrogen transportation, or the discussing about CCUS deployment, as well as all these factors considered, particularly for the emerging and developing countries, this may be also another layer of challenges in terms of technical side, but also this also requires significant amount of investment. And also the technical viability side, if you look at it, then it's not yet cost effective let's say in terms of retrofitting or having a new infrastructure in place. So more in the investment side, if you are comparing the costs between the blue hydrogen, for example, or versus green hydrogen, the opportunity costs or the capex requirement may be similar if you're considering the efficiency of this infrastructure. If the country has a priority around the renewable energy penetration in the power mix, then perhaps the green hydrogen deployment over blue hydrogen will be more economically viable choice going forward as the learning curve goes down.
Thank you very much, Moon. We have another question from Richard Roach. What price point should governments in developing countries target for green hydrogen in the short, medium, and long term to meet demand? Specifically, what future hydrogen price points should policy adoptions aim to achieve?
Yeah, so on this, I think what we have seen through analysis and case studies that it's not only a specific price point. I think over the last couple of years, most analyses were mentioning $2 per kilo of hydrogen as a sweet spot for clean hydrogen market to take off. But it's more broadly the business model. So if you produce cheap hydrogen, but then it's very costly to transport it to the point of consumption, then it won't also be very attractive. And conversely, you may have a slightly higher cost of production for hydrogen, but if you transform it into a valuable product, or if you have a sound business model for it because you have a niche market, then you may also play around it. And we also have examples of projects, maybe a bit smaller scale than what we discussed today, where the company AGF Energy, for instance, is providing a combination of hydrogen, battery storage, and renewable energy in order to supply electricity in island grids. And here the competitiveness level is a bit higher, given that they basically compete with diesel generators and imported fossil fuels. So the economics may vary a lot on the business model more than a specific price point. That being said, what's quite important is also depending on the application to identify which policy adaptation or which policy measures can help or can support the market offtake of hydrogen and its derivative. And here there are a number of analyses, and we will work this year on this, notably with H2 Global. And some past analyses also highlight, for instance, that if you go more downstream in the value chain, let's say if you go to the car manufacturer or to the person, the individual who buys a car, the additional cost to buy a car made out of green steel compared to conventional steel is maybe more acceptable. The question is then, how do you make sure that the additional costs are well covered across the value chain and that there's not one particular actor that benefits on it single-handedly?
Thank you, Joseph, for your response. I don't see any further questions in the chat. And I think we can wrap up this session. And I would like to reiterate that from the World Bank, it is a pleasure to work with the OECD. We are certain that we can have mapping and implementing existing and innovative financial mechanisms to support hydrogen projects in developing countries. And as you, Moon and Joseph mentioned it, the also relevance on having positive development impact of these projects is critical to justify their deployment in the Global South. So we look forward to continue this collaboration, and thank you everyone for joining us today.